Hi, everyone. Welcome to Bounceback 2022. We're excited to have you here today to talk a little bit about some different strategies to help you bounce back from maybe some things that weren't too successful during your first semester or the 2021 semester for a few of you if it wasn't first year. So we'll talk about strategies. We'll do a bit of introductions here to start, though. So Abi, I'll pass it over to you there.
Thank you, Jess. My name is Abhi Rao, and I'm the Academic Support Zone Coordinator on the Thunder Bay campus. And if you ever need to make any appointments and find tutors for specific subjects, or you need any kind of academic help with academic skills, please feel free to reach out to me.
Thanks, Abhi. And then I am Jess Young. I am a Student Success Advisor on the Aurelia campus. So similar to Abhi, if there's anything that you need support with for academic skill development, you can come and reach out to me on the Aurelia campus. You also can reach out to me for things like support with career and navigating those steps both after graduation and during if you needed like a part-time job or to figure out what you might be able to do with your degree. And then I also help out with some different campus events. So you might just see my face around in a few different places. But before we talk about some different strategies for bouncing back from last year, you might be wondering, okay, this is held by the Student Success Center. What do they actually do? So Student Success Center is composed of myself, a B, and then a few other teammates that really help to make sure that you're getting things to support your success. So it's right there in the title, right? Our goal is your success as a student. And the main pillars within our department are academic support. So that's a big chunk of what Abhi and I do here, student life, and then also career support. But today we're specifically going to focus on that academic side of things. So what are some of the academic supports available? Academic supports within the SSC include things like tutoring, which during the past couple years has been virtual, and it is going to continue being virtual for the majority of this next semester. So you actually have access to both Thunder Bay and Aurelia tutors for a bunch of different subjects. So this is a great resource. It's completely free, and you can find all of this info through My Success, which we'll talk a little bit about towards the end of today's presentation. Another support that we have is our Writing Center. The Writing Center is great for really helping you figure out and navigate how do I structure a paper. They're not going to edit the paper for you and they're not going to write it for you, but they can really help you take some different steps to make sure that you're thinking critically about what maybe the assignment guidelines mean and maybe how to actually structure something. So if you've ever done a compare and contrast paper, that's different than just a typical essay, and they can help with supporting those questions. We also do academic skill development. So things like this webinar today, or also just having one-on-one advising appointments, we can talk through a variety of different skills. Some of the ones that might be bouncing around in your head are things like time management or goal setting, or even note taking. These are a lot of the types of skills that we help advise on, and some of them we'll even talk about today. And then there's more. We're always adding new initiatives and new projects to really make sure that we're supporting your academic success. So if there's something that we haven't mentioned today that you think would be helpful down the line, let us know, because it's maybe something that we can implement within our offices. And then a big part too, and this is I think where my role touches in a bit more, is academics are a lot of the times influenced by your life as a student. And it's not necessarily things that are happening on campus, but things even outside of campus and in your life as a person. So we can talk through that and really support some of the different concerns that you might have of how life is impacting your academics, or maybe how academics are impacting your life positively or negatively. So reflection. And I'm not just thinking about a mirror when I talk about this, right? But the actual act of reflecting on what's happened. So self-reflection is a big thing that is really valuable to your success because it helps you grow moving forward from things that maybe didn't go as well as they had. You can reflect on positive things as well, but typically when we're talking about reflection in today's presentation, we're looking at things that didn't go as well that we could try to improve and get better on. So self-reflection itself essentially involves contemplating about yourself and how you feel about things. So it could just be the feeling that you had in the moment. It could be how things went, but it's purely your own personal experience within any sort of situation. And I have some fun quotes for you here. So when you think about reflection, your power is in your thoughts. So stay awake. In other words, remember to remember. And then remember that your thoughts are the primary cause of everything. And that second quote there is actually from the book The Secret, which is a great tool if you're just curious about how to maybe gain a bit of introspection abilities. But why is reflection important? I know if I was maybe sitting where you're sitting today, I would have a lot of questions because it's not something that I had practiced a lot either when I was first starting out in university. But reflection provides you with a pool of information about yourself for the subjects or topics that you excelled in, or for those that you didn't do so great in. And these help to also showcase what you need to continue doing, or maybe what you need to try and change, or different strategies to look to use in the future. A good thing to keep in mind when you are trying to reflect on situations is to focus on what you can control. If you focus on things that are out of your control, like the tone of your teacher's voice, or the volume that they have in their voice, or even the way that they post discussion questions in your D2L, those are things that aren't within your control. So reflecting on them isn't actually going to change what happens in the future. It's also not going to change your approach to thinking about how to work with these different types of things. So focusing on yourself and maybe the response that you had. So if your teacher isn't speaking loud enough, okay, I'm going to choose to move closer to the podium in the classroom. Or maybe I'm going to turn up the volume on my laptop or wear headphones to try and hear it a bit clearer. So focusing on what you can do different versus what somebody was doing. You can control your preparation, your attitude, and your effort in all of these different things. So when we focus on the academic side of things with reflection, thinking about things like classes, exams, or even the way that you've studied, focus on doing these things in ways that you positively reflect, so things that went well, and try and focus on what you can improve differently. So things that didn't go well in your reflection, what is that? Maybe it was that you got the textbook 2 weeks before an exam, or maybe it's that, reading textbook chapters wasn't a priority. Trying to change those to make those more of a positive reflection moving forward. One thing that you can do too is reflection isn't always necessarily needed after a long stretch of time. It's actually a little bit easier if you can reflect day by day or in shorter spurts, because then it's fresh and you can remember it a bit better. It also really allows you to be mindful in the moment of not only the reflection, but the situation that you were just in. Great example of this. And I know I was guilty of not being the greatest exam taker when I was in school. So if you're not a great exam taker, you're not alone. But after an exam is over, ask yourself some questions. Things like, what did I do well in that exam? Maybe there was a specific question that you felt really good about. Why did that question feel good to you, right? Or what can be improved for my next exam? Maybe you went in and your mind just went blank, right? Why did that happen? Trying to think about what we can do differently moving forward to make sure that doesn't happen again. And then two, what can I do before my next exam to improve, right? We're always going to have some sort of testing or exam. How can we make sure we're doing better moving forward? So as an exercise, and if you're watching this after our live webinar, I want you to pause the recording and just take a moment to do this exercise. So I'm going to get you to get 2 different colors of sticky notes. Okay, a green sticky note is going to be the reasons that you believe you struggled in first semester. And the yellow sticky note are things that you believe are most important for you to improve upon in this semester. So if you don't have sticky notes with you, that's okay. There are some different computer programs you can use. So with Mac, there's a program called Stickies you can download. And in PC, it's just sticky notes. So take a few minutes and do that for yourself. So I talked a little bit about this at the beginning there, but our academic support zone has a lot of really great resources. Our website, you can just search lakeheadu.ca/academic support zone, and that's going to bring you to our larger academic resources section. And you can really connect a lot of the strategies that we've talked about today, or get more information about how to access them through our website. So, textbooks. If you're sitting there, you know, I would ask you, who loves textbooks? I don't think I would get a huge uproar of excitement and success on this, of lots of clapping and whooping and whatnot. I know a lot of people, when they think about textbooks, it's not a very exciting concept, but it is a part of your university journey. So, if you asked a B and I to, if we were in your shoes, we probably wouldn't be excited. Except some textbooks, admittedly, nowadays I get excited about, but maybe that's just because I'm getting old. Textbooks, though, there are strategies to make it not as unfun and a little bit more, not enjoyable, but easier to work with and not feel as daunting of a task. So you might be asking yourself, do I actually have to do the readings? Yes, you should do the readings. That is a big part. But readings really provide a foundation of knowledge before your class. So teachers, if you ask them, when they assign you different readings, they want you to try and have those done before the first lecture of the week. So you actually should be working about a reading ahead of time within the schedule to keep yourself on track. Reading assigned through your syllabus or by your professor are meant to help strengthen learning within the class, and whether they do their presentations and lectures completely based off the textbook or other concepts, they're trying to really connect larger learning. If your class is asynchronous, or if maybe your professor isn't as strict on deadlines for it, you still want to try and get that reading done during the week that it's scheduled. So if your class is Monday and Wednesday, trying to make sure that your reading for that week is done at the latest by the Friday so that you have time to do next week's reading as well, and potentially get a head start on the weekend if you have the time. So not completing readings is actually a really common cause for students having trouble keeping up with their studies and also not understanding course content when it comes to exams. I learned this line a few years back, but exams are not the time to learn. They're the time to test what you have learned. So you should have learned this stuff during the course of your course versus right towards the end before the exam. Because unfortunately, your brain will not retain all that information if you try and squeeze it in. So keeping up as much as you can is really helpful. Completing readings will improve your focus, improve your understanding of content, and also allow you to contribute during class times and through online discussion boards. We're going to talk about a strategy as well later on that you can use to try and help with getting readings done. So if you've done your readings, or even if you haven't, make sure to ask your professors. Never be scared to ask a question, whether it's from the textbook or a lecture. Check in with them, ask about the material, and they can clarify it or expand on stuff. And this will help during exams or any assignments that you have to do. But what's the difference between active and passive reading? You've probably heard about active listening, and that's similar to the way that you would do reading as well. When you're passively reading, you're not actually connecting with the material that's on the page. You might be reading it, you might be highlighting it, you might be writing the exact wording down on a paper, but you're not thinking critically or connecting it to your own words. Active reading involves questioning, critiquing, and examining ideas. So when you're sitting and reading that information, maybe you're rewording it. Maybe you're tying in an example from a different course or from something in your life. And this really helps make the reading understandable and allow you to connect with it as a whole. To put things into perspective, though, I'm going to give you an example, so a concept of active versus passive action. Think about being at an airport or a busy mall if you've never been in an airport. You're walking through this location and you notice two different pathways. One of the pathways is a moving walkway, whereas the other is just a regular tiled floor. The moving walkway could potentially get you to your destination easier and a bit quicker, and it would allow you the opportunity to take a slight break. However, you may need to backtrack slightly to get to your destination. The regular tiled floor offers the opportunity to engage with a whole bunch of different pit stops, like the washroom, a restaurant, a gift shop, and much more. But it would mean walking consistently throughout, and you may need to dodge or move around people if you're in a rush. Engaging with the moving walkway is an example of passive engagement. You're going through the motions but aren't truly engaged in what you're doing. Using the regular tiled floor is an example of active engagement. You're an active participant in what you're doing, and you're in control of the choices that you're making. And although active learning may take up more energy in the moment, it saves you potential backtracking and limited control later on. When reading your textbook, keep in mind these differences. And to put things simply, passive reading is normally practiced when you read for pleasure, whereas active reading is more when you are trying to think critically about the material. So to sum it up here, I've talked a little bit about this already. So active reading, it's going to help you understand the key ideas and concepts in depth. It's going to significantly improve your concentration, understanding, and recall of information. So being able to put that into practice come exam time or come an assignment or a discussion post. And then although it takes more time, it's going to save you time in the long run. Because you've thought critically and connected with the material, you're saving study time closer to exam because maybe you have things in your own words already, or you can connect with a concept easier because you've already done it a few times. A strategy that you can use is metacognition. It's a big word, but it's not all that complex in reality, I promise. Metacognition is essentially the process of thinking about your thinking. So when you're doing reading, doing things where you're identifying the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Those are the big things that will allow you to think about exactly what you're reading and then develop future thoughts on them. This is actually one of the highest forms of active learning strategies for post-secondary students, and it's gaining a lot of traction. So when you ask a lot of different scholars, they recommend this approach versus just traditional textbook studying where you're writing notes verbatim. But how does the information you're learning relate to what you already know? You want to try and develop those connections, because a lot of the times in each of our programs, the course content connects with each other because it's part of the larger study. So if you're thinking about psychology, psychology is the big branch. There's going to be connections in all of the other individual courses that you have. Or just like engineering, there's going to be foundational knowledge that's going to connect through every single course that you take. And also think, are these things that you feel engaged in? Maybe you're not actually in a good mindset to study in that moment. That's something that you're thinking metacognitively because you're thinking about how you're feeling as well. And if you're not feeling great in the moment to be able to learn, you're not going to be able to pick up the content as easily. Another way to think with metacognition is to try and create study questions as you're reading things or as you're learning. This will help to increase your knowledge and also identify gaps in the understanding that you have based on what you've read or from lectures that you've participated in. Creating questions during these moments is also really helpful because then when it comes to exam time, it's going to make studying a lot easier because then you're answering questions that you've thought of as you're reading content. So realistically, a very quick sum up of this is you want to analyze rather than absorb. So you're looking to deepen your understanding versus just take in what's on the page. So for some active reading strategies, we recommend using the SQ3R strategy. And what this breaks down to be is survey, question, read, recite, and review. And each of these has its own understanding within it. So survey the entire chapter, take notes on headings, graphics, and bold text. If you're somebody that is a visual learner, maybe you're actually redrawing some of the text or the graphics that you've seen in the textbook to connect it to your own type of learning. Question not only what you've read, but if there's questions listed in the textbook, try and answer them, because that's going to help to further your own learning and deepen the understanding. It's building that analysis versus absorbing. Then read, right? So, we talked about this. It sounds very easy in theory, but making sure that you're reading with purpose. So having an active reading strategy, right? Questioning as you're reading, not just necessarily reading, and then not understanding what that last paragraph was, you read it 3 times again. Recite what you've learned. If you've written notes while you're reading, which we all would recommend doing because it's going to help to really have an active component, recite what you've wrote. So maybe you're talking it through at the end to yourself or reading it out loud to yourself. And then you can see, okay, did I miss any content anywhere? Or does this make sense now that I say it out loud? And if you have a friend, especially if it's somebody in the same course, recite it back to them. And then maybe they can do the same with their notes, because it might strengthen your own learning too. And then finally, review what you've done, right? So after you've read, after you've done your questions, after you have all your notes done, review everything that you've done to make sure that you feel good about this. You might be sitting there too and thinking, okay, I know that textbook readings take a long time, and now you've just given me 5 extra steps. I promise you, you don't have to do all of these 5 steps all at once. These are things that you can space out over the course of your reading. So giving yourself the time and making space for this so that you can learn and really absorb this information in a way that you've analyzed it, so that when you do get to exams, it feels good. Okay. So thanks for that first part there. So now I'm going to pass it over to Abi for some strategies on note taking.
Wonderful, thank you, Jess. So let's talk about note taking and review. So in the second half of this presentation, we'll specifically talk about like strategies you can use to make your chronicling of all the ideas that you're learning in your classes more effective and organized. So let's talk specifically about what note-taking is. And a lot of students, a lot of us, even when I was a student, I used to feel that notes were just like you sat down and you just listened to your instructor and then you wrote those points down on a sheet of paper. But most of the time, I would find myself not ever going back to those notes and not ever reviewing them. And so it was just kind of a futile exercise. So if you feel that way, that you end up taking points during the class, but then you end up not using these notes, then we will talk today about the most effective ways to optimize this note-taking process. So let's go to the next slide, please. So the next slide, so what we will specifically talk about is when you're taking notes in a class for any specific class, notes should always be taken understanding how the content that's covered on that specific day fits into the bigger picture. So in other words, what you want to do is taking notes with a little bit of critical thinking. And so if you have been attending class regularly and you have been listening to what the instructor has to say, and you have reviewed the syllabus, or when the instructor in the earlier classes has covered the syllabus, they probably have shared with you what the main idea of the course is. Sometimes you also notice that instructors repeat certain points throughout the session of the term, right? And what these points should tell you is these are important points, or these are probably the major outcomes of this course. And so a good strategy is to identify what the main outcomes of the course are, either by reviewing the syllabus or just paying attention to your instructor when sometimes they tell you, this is very important, right? If they say something like that, a good strategy is to chronicle them, then write them down on a sheet of paper or in notebook or wherever you're keeping your notes, whether on a computer or in a physical book format. And then when you're in the classroom and you're attending the class and you're listening to the points that are getting covered, what you want to do is kind of like think in terms of how does this lecture material that's getting covered tie in with the main important points. So one of the key strategies to taking notes in the class is not just chronicling what the instructor is saying and writing it down on a sheet of paper, but it's actually making connections with how that information fits with the course content and the course outcomes. So let's go to the next slide and look at what are some effective strategies. So the first thing you want to definitely do whenever you go to class is, before you go to class, prepare yourself for the class. And by preparing for yourself for the class would mean take a look at what's getting covered in that specific class. Even if you do not have the time to read in depth the textbook material that is probably getting covered in the class, it still helps to just physically scan through the pages, to just look through the pages. If there are specific graphs or charts or some visuals, just look at those charts and graphs, read their captions, because what that'll do is it'll give you a general idea about what material is getting covered in the class. And when you listen to that getting covered by the instructor, these visuals and these captions will start popping in your head, and you'll start making connections. And that's when the information will stick with you. Another strategy is read the headings. So within chapters, you know that there are like main headings, there are subheadings provided. So even if you're not able to read the paragraphs in detail, at least read the headings and subheadings, because what that'll do is it'll give you a general idea or an outline of the information that's going to get covered in the class. So the moral of the story is, when you go to class, make sure that you go with some level of preparation, right? So just don't go into a class cold. Read something, look at the pictures, just engage with the class material just before you go into class. Even something as simple as open the class schedule and look at what is getting covered that specific day. So even a small act of just looking at what information is going to get covered that day is going to give you some level of preparedness and some kind of an anchor to which you can latch onto the new information that will be coming to you in that classroom. Next slide. One specific technique that you can use when you prepare for a class is using what's called as Cornell Notes. Cornell Notes have been time and again tested by various universities, by various students, students ranging in their academic careers at different stages. So right from freshman students right up to doctoral students. They all have demonstrated that taking notes in a specific format, which is called as Cornell Notes, makes their life a lot easy, makes their note taking more organized, and it also helps them retain information very well. We'll watch a very short video from Algonquin College on Cornell Notes, and then we will briefly talk about what they are.
This video will explain the Cornell method of taking notes. The Cornell method is a strategy for taking effective, organized notes. While it originated at Cornell University, it is now widely used in many learning institutions. Step 1 is to set up your page. Divide your page into 3 sections: a left column, a right column, and a summary area at the bottom of your page. The format is often described as an upside-down capital T. The left column will be the Q column, the right column will be the notes column, and the bottom section will be for your summary. Step 2 is to start with your notes column. Take notes as you normally would, based on what the professor is saying and what you are seeing on PowerPoint slides or other visual aids that are being used. Step 3 is to fill in your Q column. Based on the notes you took in Step 2, go back and fill in your Q column. The Q column is meant to give you a quick reference to what this page of notes is related to. Use questions, key terms, and headings to help you quickly understand what the notes you took relate to. This is helpful when you need to review a whole semester of notes. You can quickly reference the area you need instead of reading through all your notes trying to find a specific section. Step 4 is to fill in your summary section. Summarize the notes from this page in 1 or 2 key learning outcomes. When you are reviewing your notes, this summary gives you a quick snapshot of the notes found on that page. Try the Cornell method to take more effective notes. Happy studying!
So I hope this really short and concise video gave you a decent sense of what the Cornell note-taking practice is. As they said in the video, that it's been time tested and it's a really effective technique. So I really encourage you to try the Cornell note technique. So as an example, let's go to the next slide. So what you could do is, depending on the kind of class you're taking, what you basically want to do is every time you take notes, you want to divide your page up into 3 parts, right? And then on the top right-hand side, that's where you will capture all the content ideas that your instructor is covering. Now, when you're in a classroom and your instructor is saying some specific points, you're probably not going to be able to capture everything that the instructor is saying. And that is exactly the point. You don't have to write down everything word for word in the content section. Just pick on the main points and then just write it down. Even if this section looks messy, you are writing over things, you make multiple columns in here, that's perfectly okay. So all the specific details that you have, that's what you want to put in the content box. Immediately after the class is done, what you want to do is kind of step back from these content points. So of course, if you have a class right after the class that you just took, then maybe later in the afternoon or in the evening, but preferably the same day. What you want to do is kind of step away, look at the content, and then write notes to yourself. And the notes to yourself, what you want to identify are the main points. So the main big picture points that kind of cover the content area. So what you're doing is kind of think of it like using a sieve, where you're putting all the content in, but you're getting a specific kind of essence of the information that was covered in the class, right? And then maybe in 24 hours, right? So after that information is kind of has sat with you. And so that's because when our brain processes information, the first time when you hear something, it actually goes into your short-term memory part of your brain, right? And then when you spend a little bit more time with that information, that's when the information goes into the long-term part. So if you want to remember information for a longer time, what you want to do is put the information in the long-term memory. And the way to do that is, say after like 24 hours that you have listened to this lecture, so maybe the next day, you revisit your notes and then you summarize the most important points that you learned from that class. And also because of that time distance, like about those 24 hours, it's good enough time for you to have a little bit of distance from the information you heard from your professor. And so at this stage, your brain is ready to kind of even pin down the information into 2 or 3 sentences. So what you want to do in the summary section, and that's like the third box at the bottom right, is to just choose the most important points. And I personally call it like takeaways. Like what you want to do is, what did I take away from this class or that specific lecture? What was most memorable to me? That's what you want to write down in this block. If you find difficulty like visualizing what might go into the summary, think of it this way. Think of you sitting with your classmates or your friends in a cafeteria right after you attended class. And you want to tell your friends, hey, I just attended this class in psychology or natural resource management or genetics. And guess what I learned, right? And then in one sentence, if you can summarize that information, or in a couple of sentences, you can summarize that information, bingo, that is what you want to do in your summary section. So this practice of what you did in your Cornell notes, you did 3 steps. You first wrote down everything in detail. And then after that, you kind of sieved that information and found what are the most important points. You gave yourself some time for your brain to process that information, and then you came up with takeaways. And so imagine like engaging with the same information in 3 different ways at 3 different times. is really going to make the memorability of that information really stronger. And so, which is why the Cornell Notes have proven that once you do these steps, the information will stick with you for a long time, which means you have to do a lot less prep during your exam time. So this is going to make your life a lot easy. Okay, and so very simple steps, and they don't take a lot of time. So do give Cornell Notes a try. Let's go to the next slide, please. And now we'll talk specifically about test preparations. And so, you know, you've attended classes, and as Jess mentioned earlier in the presentation, tests are not the time for you to be reading your materials or learning the information, but tests are the time for you to review the information that you have learned, right? And so a lot of times students feel that need to start learning some information during the test time. But what that does is it confuses the brain in terms of going back and forth between the review and the recall of information. So when you're preparing for your test, that is really a good time for you to review the information that has been given to you. Let's take a look at how to review your notes. And so what you've done so far is you have collected all your notes, right? You've made all these specific notes. Maybe you used a Cornell style. Maybe you use your own specific style. So, you know, if you have found a technique or a method that has really worked for you, stick with it. But you've collected information. But here is what is called as the curve of forgettability. Now, let's take a look at this graph that we have here. Right, so when you attend a class, right? So the black line that you can see, the black line is how soon we forget information. So in a classroom, when you're sitting and listening to information, if the instructor gives you, say, 100 units of information, most of the time in the classroom, based on whether it was a lecture or you did an activity, we probably retain about like 50 to 75% of that actual information. So we do not imbibe like entire 100%, but that's okay, right? It's okay to even imbibe like 75% of that information, because you might cover the rest of the information when you say read or you review, like some of that will come back. But the trick here is we forget that information really quickly. So within a week, we are down to like remembering only 25% of that information. And within a month, we probably retain only 2 to 3% of that information. So if, you know, if in your experience, if you've ever felt that you just open a textbook during your exam prep and you look at a section and you say, when did my professor talk about this? Right? So if you feel that I've never seen this information before, the chances are that's because it was, you know, you heard that maybe in the earlier part of the semester, but by the end of the semester, which is almost 2 months or 3 months away, you are retaining only 1 to 2% of that information of that was covered, right? So, and why does this happen? This is because our brain has a very finite mass, right? So, and our brains are really clever. Our brains will only want to save information that they think is most important. When we hear something just once or twice, the brain doesn't really think that that is important information. So it might just take a little chunk of that and then store it in the brain in some corner. And the recall part of that information is also not very strong, because it says, okay, that's just information I have. I'll just put it somewhere in a corner. But you have to teach your brain to think that this is important information. And the way you do that is you constantly remind the brain that this information is important. This information is important. For example, think if you learn how to ride a bicycle, right? How did you learn that? You had to try it multiple times for your brain to learn the concept of balance, right? And once your brain learned the concept of balance, then now you know how to ride a bicycle or a two-wheel vehicle, you know, all your life. That's because your brain got trained into the art of balance, and then it thought that that was really important for it to remember. The same thing is with information as well. So the key here, or the main takeaway here, is reviewing information is extremely important. When you review information periodically, and it doesn't mean you have to spend hours looking at it, but periodically, even if you spend 5 minutes just even scanning through that information or skimming through it, the chances of you remembering that information for a longer period of time is really going to go up. So the trick here, it's like a very easy strategy, doesn't take a lot of time, it's very efficient, is reviewing information is extremely important. So let's go to the next slide and let's take a look at some review strategies. Okay, so some review strategies that I'll share with you very briefly. One is your notes. Like, how do you review notes? So a lot of us think that reviewing notes basically means looking at the notes and reading them again and again. Some of them are really good at memorization. So we might look at our notes and then maybe memorize them and try to like remember all the 7 points or 10 points that are given. Or say if you're in a chemistry class and you're learning about, say, Krebs cycle or some kind of a chemical pathway, you think I will just memorize these 7 steps of, that specific equation and I'll be good. While that strategy works to an extent, of course it does, but it's also a very difficult strategy. It's also a boring strategy. It takes a lot of discipline for us to kind of continue memorizing information, right? Because the brain always wants to do something new, and trying to memorize the same thing again and again can make the brain get bored very easily. So one strategy for you to work with your notes is to elaborate on your notes, which means look at your notes, but not just memorize them, but try to write your notes or engage with your notes using different language. So if you've created your notes and if they are in a text format, try to create a visual out of your notes. Try to create a flow chart out of your notes. Try to paraphrase the information provided there. Try to make connections between, say, what was covered in like today's lecture with something that was covered in last week's lecture. So when you start making connections with your ideas, that is really going to help you create a better understanding and create a stronger network of ideas within your brain, right? So it's basically you're teaching your brain to remember the information by latching on to what it's already learned. So here's another technique that you can use, something like a concept map. A concept map is basically a visual representation of the ideas you're learning. And for a given semester or for a given course, or even for, say, a given module or project that you're doing in a class, you can start a concept map that you can work through maybe like a couple of weeks or 3 weeks, right? So it could be something that's developed. The way you do that is you take the main idea of your topic and you put it right dead center on a piece of paper or on a computer screen. So as Jess mentioned, there are like sticky note apps available both on Mac and on PC. So choose one of them, right dead center, put down the main idea of that week or of that class, and then start identifying what are the different ideas. And then every idea becomes one little, text box. And so you put those text box, you can use different colors. If you're doing it on a piece of paper, you can use highlighters, but then you take one idea and then you start fanning it out to what are the connecting ideas, right? The act of visually engaging with this information is going to help create a neural network of idea connections cognitively in your brain, which will make the information stick longer. So concept maps is a really effective strategy for you to explore your notes, not just based on reading, but trying a different technique. Let's take a look at the next slide, please. Other review strategies, more straightforward ones, are your social connections. And that is utilizing the social network that you have within a classroom, namely your classmates and your instructor. When you talk to your instructor about a certain point, what you're basically doing is, so say if you go to your instructor and you talk about a specific subject or a specific concept, you're basically conducting a review. In addition, if say you feel a little uncomfortable talking to your instructor, we also have a lot of tutors within the academic support zone. So meet with one of the tutors and have that conversation with them on a specific topic. And what that kind of conversation is going to help you is going to create this feedback of back and forth, which will help strengthen your point. So for example, when Jess mentioned earlier that when you have written notes, what you also want to do within the SQ3R technique is recite your notes to each other, right? So that is a really effective technique. Just the act of speaking is going to help you. If any one of you have helped, say, your niece or nephews or your roommate with any specific concept, you might have realized that that concept or that subject matter actually stuck with you better. So the act of teaching something to somebody or even saying it out aloud to somebody actually trains the brain to understand the information better. So if you haven't already done so, maybe think of creating a study group within your, amongst your classmates. And then, or if you need our help to create a study group, please reach out to Jess or I, and then we can both help you create a study group that you can work with each other. But using a social network is something that will help you not only build community, but also is a very effective review strategy. Okay. Let's go to the next one, and let's talk a little bit about strategies you can use pre-exam, just before your exam, things that you can do specifically to work through your review. So next slide is the 5-day study plan. And we have a ton of presentations on the Academic Support Zone resource page. And we also have a handout if you go onto academic resources, specifically giving you like a worksheet where you can use that to create a 5-day study plan. But what is the 5-day study plan? The 5-day study plan is an effective technique for you to plan for studying for, say, 4 subjects just before your exam. So say during your reading week or during your exam prep week, you can take 5 days out of your that week and then effectively study for all your subjects. I can, in a nutshell, I can tell you what it basically means. Is what you do is on the first day you start with the most challenging or the most difficult subject you have. You spend more time on it, but as you continue, you review that information every day, right? And then every day you review that information with less and less time, because say the first day you took 2 hours to learn that information, it'll probably take you about half an hour to review that information the next day, and then the following day it might take you about 10 minutes, and then the last day it might take you 5 minutes, right? So just the concept is the same. Reviewing is very important. When you try to recall that information multiple times, it's going to stick with you better, right? So please check out the academic resources page if you want to just get and download the study plan template or worksheet and then fill it up, and then you're good to go. Okay. Next slide. So let's just recap the session that we talked about. So academic experiences can sometimes feel a little daunting, right? And especially during the time of the pandemic, we have a lot of, these are extraordinary times. We have been having experiences that we've never had earlier in our school, high school, or early college times or university times. And so the suggestions that Jess and I have brought to you today are primarily focused on helping you optimize this experience for yourself, right? Things that you can do specifically to reach your complete academic potential, right? Some simple things that you probably want to do in addition to what we just covered is use a calendar. Like, Google Calendar is so widely used. So my life honestly changed after I really started using my Google Calendar, very effectively. It really helps me keep like multiple kinds of meetings and deadlines, because there are so many reminders and just very simple features within Google Calendar. I'm sure you know about them. This is not a class in Google Calendars, but use the Google Calendar. I just mentioned, please try the SQ3R technique. It's very effective. I have tried it in my teaching experiences. I've had students try it in classes, and we know that it works. So please use them. Another point is when you take notes, try to engage with your notes in different ways. Review your notes not just simply by reading them, but maybe drawing maps with them, or creating a concept diagram, or in just a bunch of bubbles, or even doodling. Research has shown that people who doodle when they are working, so even just like what you think is mindless drawing, actually helps you retain information longer. So feel free to even doodle on a sheet of paper when you're in a classroom as you're listening to your instructor, because you will remember that information a lot better. And make sure you review your information before your exams. Have fun with it, right? So the more you engage with information, you're going to have fun with all this different learning that's going to happen with you. And so we really want to thank you for taking the time today to listen to us on these specific points. We'll just give you a little bit of an action plan right now. So if we can go to the next slide, please.
I was just going to add one thing as well. So for anybody too that, would like to sit down and actually talk through their timetable and their kind of commitments that they have, Abi and I would be happy to do that and sit down with you and kind of set up your Google Calendar for success, but also walk through your timetable and help you map out what does time management look like for you, or what is priority with your time, so that we can set you up for success with this coming year.
Absolutely.
So your next steps, as Abi mentioned, we do want to give you kind of a call to action following this presentation here, is look at your past semester that you just went through, reflect on some of those experiences again, try putting these things into practice, and check out our Academic Support Zone website. That's really going to give you a great setup for some different resources and things that you can implement. And you can even reach out to myself or Abi, right? So try and reach out to one of us. I know I would love to sit down with anybody and chat about kind of their time management and scheduling. And we'd be happy to do that through Zoom or in person when we're able to. So just connect with us through our My Success platform. So I mentioned it at the beginning, My Success is kind of the hub for all of our appointments and different things. But if for some reason you can't find things through My Success, you can always feel free to email myself or Abi. For my email, it's Aurelia, which is ORILLIA.SSC@lakeheadu.ca. Or you can email Abi at academiczone.ssc@lakeheadu.ca. So feel free to get in touch with either one of us if you can't find our appointments through My Success, or if you just have any questions following this webinar. And then if you're looking for a bit more of a social side of things, join us on social media to keep up to date on all events and everything to do with Student Success Center, as well as the larger community. So thanks for joining us today, and we hope that you can bounce back from anything that didn't go super great last semester and into success for this semester. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.